human beings, but we would like to know that there's more like that to come. And we're sharing this planet with 8 to 10 million other species, but we're driving them to extinction in the greatest rate in history. And the foot is on the accelerator in the destruction of the biosphere. And we are co-jointly responsible for that. In the 2019 election, 90% of Australians voted to worsen climate change and to destroy more species. So let me just repeat that. At the last federal election, more than 90% of people, in some cases, but around 90%, voted to destroy more species and to hasten climate change. That's because they voted for parties like the Labor Party, the Coalition, Clive Palmer, One Nation, who want to open more coal mines, pursue more gas fracking, to log more forests, to maraud our oceans more, to take krill out of Antarctica, and so on, in a world in which 90% of our fisheries are already going backwards or have collapsed. So we have to think, why did that happen? And that's because we're human beings who are much more about living for the day rather than living for tomorrow. But we've got to change that, because if we don't have a tomorrow, we blight the futures of our own existence here in this day, on this magnificent little planet, this blue dot, as Carl Sagan so poignantly put it, which so far as we know is the only living place in the whole of the universe. And it is up to us to turn this around. The odds are very big. I know that because we see it every day here in Tasmania, and you've only got to read the news media to see it worldwide. However, nobody else is going to do it. And it is the classic that only a small number of people it takes to change the world. And the same with a small number of voters. So it's very, very important that people don't vote for more coal mines, don't vote for more destruction of forests, don't vote for the spread of industrial fish farming, don't vote for the exploitation of Antarctica or robots on the bottom of our ocean, etc. It's a big onus, and I think the tide is going in the right direction, but you wouldn't know so by reading the media, for example, including the ABC, where we see a paucity of commentary on the environment generally, the extinction crisis and the climate emergency, because in a way, in the back of people's minds, these are secondary issues to getting stuff, having cuts in taxes, having more money in the pocket, and so on. Looking after the environment does not mean you can't have an equal society. That's incredibly important. And we can, of course, do that. But it does mean hauling in the extravagance of the ultra-rich, the billionaires and the exploiters. And that's something we can do through voting in the ballot box. For those who haven't voted and who haven't quite yet made up their mind, just have a look at what the various parties say on the single issue of coal mining, or the two issues of coal mining and logging of forests. If your candidate can't say, I will stop the logging of native forests and I will cross the floor and vote against coal mining, it's very important to say, not just that they'll influence their party, but they will cross the floor to vote against anything that aids and abets coal mining, gas fracking, oil extraction is incredibly important. I'm a great believer in democracy. It is the best means of governance that we human beings have ever or will ever come up with. It needs great support, but it needs us to use our vote to influence it greatly too. This is a representative democracy. We're in that carnival of democracy at the moment, and this little planet of ours and its future has got to be at the front of more people's minds. That way, we're off to a good start come next Sunday.
I'm zooming in from the Bindle country here in Townsville, smack in the middle of the Great Barrier Reef. So I'm going to talk just very briefly about what's been happening to the Great Barrier Reef, particularly the bleaching event that we've just seen this summer. It's the 6th bleaching event that the Barrier Reef has now experienced. The first one was in 1998, which then was the hottest year on record for the whole planet. That record, of course, has been broken many times because of anthropogenic heating due primarily to fossil fuel combustion and to land clearing. The first bleaching was a big shock. It affected about 2/3 of the Great Barrier Reef and probably killed about 10% of the corals. In retrospect, it was the mildest of the 6 bleaching events that we've seen. The reef bleached for a second time in 2002. 1998 was a strong El Nino, but 2002 wasn't. It was the first bleaching event that we saw that wasn't triggered by warmer than average El Nino conditions. And then we were incredibly lucky. We had a 14-year gap between the 2002 bleaching event and the 2016 event, which was another strong El Nino summer. Those gaps are critically important for the ecology of coral reefs. They're the windows of opportunity for the recovery of depleted populations that are killed by these episodic, unprecedented, record-breaking heat waves. And then since 2016, we've had no fewer than 4 more bleaching events in 2017. So that was the first experience we've seen of back-to-back bleaching in 2 consecutive summers, which is a scenario that the climate modelers will tell us will be the norm by about 2040 on most coral reefs around the world. And we also saw bleaching in 2020 and this year in 2022. This year is pretty shocking because it's the first time that water temperatures during cooler La Nina summers are hot enough to trigger mass bleaching. That has never happened before. And the reason is that water temperatures now during La Ninas are actually warmer than they were during El Ninos about 30 or 40 years ago due to global warming. The gaps are getting shorter. We will never see a 14-year gap again due to global warming. In the last few years, we've seen gaps of 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years. And that's nowhere near enough for a half-decent recovery of even the fastest growing corals. It takes about a decade for a decent recovery of the fastest growing coral species. So there's no time to lose for Australia and other countries to stabilize global temperatures as soon as possible and at as low a temperature as we can manage. Certainly within the 1.5 to 2 degrees of global average warming that are the targets of the Paris Agreement. We're nowhere near on track to meet those targets, particularly here in Australia, where the targets are especially weak. You often hear the phrase of coral reefs being the canary in the coal mine. It's not a phrase that I use because I think they can be more accurately described as a kind of a poster child, because tragically, there's no shortage of other vulnerable ecosystems to climate change, and you don't need to leave Tasmania to see what's happening to kelp beds and to the forests. It's happening to all ecosystems. It's just that coral reefs, I think, are more in the limelight than others. So my take-home message to everyone who's listening is, please vote for the reef. Please vote for climate change. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for having us on. It's really great to be able to get this across the country a lot more. Scarborough gas and gas projects here in Western Australia don't get anywhere near as much coverage over East or we find it a lot harder to get the coverage over East as we would like. So it's really great to have opportunities like this. So yeah, Scarborough gas, I'll kind of go into what that's all about. And so up in the northwest of Western Australia here is a town called Karratha, and just outside of that is the Burrup Peninsula. And on that peninsula is 2 existing gas facilities, both run by Woodside. and one is the Pluto facility, one is the Karratha gas plant. And the Karratha gas plant was made in the 70s and 80s, and takes gas from hundreds of miles out in the Indian Ocean and brings it back on shore, produces it into LNG, and then exports it, the vast majority of it, overseas. And it's the same with Pluto as well. That was made about a decade ago. Scarborough Gas, how that fits into it all is that they are proposing to start drilling this new gas field, which has never been exploited yet, and then bringing that's 300 kilometers out into the Indian Ocean, bringing that back into the existing Pluto facility, and in doing so, they will produce something in the region of 1.7 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions over the project's lifetime. Now, all of this again will go offshore. All the gas will go offshore, so it's not like it's actually being used by West Australians or even by other Australians. And yeah, just the Scarborough project alone will be enough to sort of tip Australia into, sorry, not tip, it will be enough to mean that we won't reach our Paris requirements just with that project alone. So it's really important that it doesn't go ahead. And another reason it's really important is because this is just the first stage, this project. This is part of the wider Burrup Hub project, which Woodside is planning to go ahead with. And they want to expand the other plant, the other facility, to take more gas from, and anyone who's been around for a little while may remember the Browse Basin, and how 10 years ago they were proposing to exploit the Browse Basin, which is further north, and bring that into a new gas facility just north of Broome. Now, that was at James Price Point, and that campaign was successful in stopping that from going ahead. We're in exactly the same battle again now, and they're now proposing to bring Browse gas down to Karratha, down to the Burrup Hub, having one huge facility between two facilities to produce an exorbitant amount of emissions. It would, between the two projects, it would produce something in the region of 6 billion tons of CO2 over their lifetimes, and it's just, yeah, absolutely incredible. This is in a much greater context of WA being the only state whose emissions are still rising. A few years ago, it was a bunch of LNG projects coming online in WA that made Australia's national emissions continue to rise. It was that alone. And we're also, I think, one of two states that doesn't have any legislation to achieve net zero by 2050. So yeah, we're in a real fight, but there's hope, and we've been presented with a glorious opportunity. We've been continuing to fight against Scarborough Gas and the wider project for the last couple of years, but we've got this glorious opportunity over the next few months, where the Independent Environmental Protection Authority here in WA, they're releasing their new greenhouse gas policy for public comment, and to take for us to get involved in shaping what that looks like. And that will ultimately have a big effect on all these projects, not just Scarborough and the wider Burrup Hub, but also fracking in the Kimberley and all these other huge gas projects which keep popping up almost on a weekly basis. So I completely agree, like, with what Bob said earlier about it's really important to look at who's got what policy in the lead up to the election, but don't just get involved with democracy on the day of the election. Get involved with it afterwards, by filling out submissions, getting involved with opportunities when we can. There's other stuff that we need to do as well all the time, getting in touch with investors, shareholders, etc., which we're always doing. But yeah, all of it is necessary. So yeah, thank you for giving me the time to get this across to a bigger audience.
Thanks so much for having me here. It's such an honor to be in a Zoom room with Bob Brown and Jenny and everybody else who's on this panel. Yeah, so I'm Belinda. I'm here on Awabakal country in Newcastle. A little tiny bit about Surfers for Climate. We're a Sea Roots movement dedicated to positive climate action. A couple of years ago now, I guess you could say I was kicked in the ass after attending a climate summit on Heron Island, learning from some of the head researchers and scientists at the Climate Council about the facts of climate change and what that sort of meant for us ocean lovers, with all the effects, you know, along our coastlines and in our saltwater environment. All the things we learnt sort of really made sense of all the changes that I was already experiencing and seeing, everything from coastal erosion to, you know, warming sea temps, and the effects that they were kind of having, obviously, as Terry just mentioned, on our global reef systems, which, as many of you may or may not know, kind of a lot of these reef systems are actually home to some of surfing's most cherished waves. Also with the giant kelp forests down in Tasmania and other regions along the Great Southern Reef. There's also other, you know, things that I was noticing in my surfing time, which was just these massive and intense storms that were literally picking boulders up and displacing them, throwing boulders on the road, ripping up soft corals. I'd been surfing for 40 years and I'd never, ever seen anything like this, yet it was occurring in the last couple of years. Also, other places that surfers like to visit, like the Solomon Islands, that are really being affected by sea level rise. And I guess it was just like a huge indication that us surfers were truly on the front lines of experiencing firsthand these climate impacts every day along our coastlines and below our boards. So we just thought, wow, if we're, you know, my co-founder and I, Johnny Abeg, like if we're that, you know, kind of slapped in the face about all this and sort of gasping for air, imagine what the surf community would feel as well. And, you know, 85% of all Australians live within 50 kilometres of the coastline. And after COVID, if any of you visit the beach, you probably are aware that now 85% of all Australians all own surfboards and we're all out there surfing. At least that's what it feels like anyway. And, you know, in numbers, that holds true power, and it also holds true political weight. We're very aware that surfers come from a very diverse background, you know, whether that be identity, culture, male, female, even down to what sort of boards that we ride. Surfers have never really been able to agree on many things. And we do think, though, that protecting the environment, for whatever selfish reason that may be, that surfers can all unite on one thing, which is protecting the waves that we all love. So we're really trying to get out there and empower surfers to come together in this election, exactly like what Bob said, which is to vote to protect the places that we love. So we're calling it our Don't Cook It on Climate campaign, where we actually just finished a tour on the east coast of Australia, where we spoke to thousands of surfers at Don't Cook It on Climate car park cinema events about all the different solutions that exist to the climate crisis, but the one that we all hold right now, you know, in the next couple of days, which is making our vote count and making sure that we do vote on climate. So, you know, our message was left, right, green, and everything in between. Like, we want to see bipartisan support for climate change. And we hope that you guys, you know, jump onto all those websites, Google it, really be informed by exactly who you're voting for, because it's not just going to determine the fate of our waves, but it's literally going to determine the fate of planet Earth at the moment and the rest of our lives. So you know, really just trying to pull all this together. And I think since we have experienced these catastrophic fires, we've experienced the floods, and we saw surfers kind of on the, you know, they were the first responders leading rescue efforts, and also like community organizing, is that we've seen this huge influx in surfers just in the last couple of months calling us saying like, what can I do? What can I do? Like, I want to jump on board and help, but I don't know what I can do. So I think just by experiencing all these extreme weather events, which we were warned about, it's no big shock or surprise. We knew they were coming. Has kind of been a bit of a rallying call for surfers to jump on board and really get behind this. And so, yeah, our message is very much the same as Bob's, which is vote for the climate, vote for our beaches, vote for our future.
Thanks for having me. And I feel I'm talking about the tip of an iceberg here, and there are lots and lots of people who have a lot of information about this. I'm talking about this as a little girl who grew up in Tasmania, and as a parent, really, and what I have discovered over the last few years. So I grew up with my mum and dad, and my family were very, very environmentally in love with the wilderness of Tasmania. And my dad always had a massive fascination with the natural world. And so we would have days and days of coast walking and looking at rock pools. And my sister would take me snorkeling in kelp forests. And my brothers and I would go fishing, and they'd dive for abalone and crayfish. And you know, I've lived all around the world, but I decided that I wanted to bring our children up in Tasmania so that they could have that same childhood experience that I had, and that they could be looking at chitons and giant cowries and seeing weedy sea dragons and octopus and fossicking and collecting their own, fossicking rock pools and collecting their own abalone. And when we moved back to Tasmania and we moved up to Bruny Island, and we were welcomed into a really beautiful community of people. But we soon discovered that the community had been tormented by these growing fish farms that were directly opposite, growing industrial noise and light from the fish farms. And they'd actually been having complaints and discussions with the fish farms for over 15 years, and sort of ignored or dismissed. And the fish pens doubled, and then they tripled, and then there were these huge industrial ships throbbing in our channel 24 hours a day, and all of a sudden a little peaceful bit of channel has become an industrialized factory fish farming. So it's actually like having some kind of semi-trailer, or even sometimes it's like having an airplane, big Boeing 747 idling outside your bedroom window in the middle of the night, or all day long for several days on end. Anyway, there are small communities of Tasmanians living near fish farms all around Tassie, and being tormented by their noise and the light pollution and being ignored. And not only that, when I take my children down to the channel to swim and fossick and fish and snorkel, there is nothing there. There's no kelp, there's no abalones, there's no weedy sea dragons, there's no leather jackets, there's no fish, there's no dolphins. There's just sea lettuce and slime and lots and lots and lots of jellyfish. And it's devastating. And I don't want any Tasmanian having to live near a fish farm. But the strange thing is that as our little communities sort of came together and started discovering that noise and light is not the only devastation that is happening. It's opened our eyes to worse and more environmental destruction and endangerment. The debris that they are polluting our waterways with and shorelines with has actually become a catastrophic and catastrophically hazardous for sailors and for recreational boat people. There are the seals that are being murdered everywhere. There's the dye and antibiotics and battery hens that the salmon are being fed. There's this, all of the hatcheries that are around Hobart are actually in rivers that directly flow into our drinking water. And our drinking water is now being polluted with sludge and bacteria and algae that is extremely toxic and dangerous, and no one is doing anything about it. There's little news articles here and there, but no governments are doing anything about it. Our Environmental Protection Agency doesn't seem to be protecting the environment at all. And now they're also planning on expanding these fish farms and expanding them into Bass Strait, which, as far as I understand from several scientists, is like a big bucket of bathwater between the two currents running down either side of Tasmania. And so this is just going to be a sloshing mess of feces and slime and destruction. They're really bad neighbours. They take everything from the sea and they leave it full of antibiotics, feces, slime, and barren of the myriad of beautiful sea life that existed not so long ago. I'm not that old. My children are already missing out. It's disgusting. It's our waterways, and it's being sold off to some multi-millionaires for bugger all money with no consultation from local people. So what you can do about it is you can vote. You can vote for the environment. You can watch a little film my husband, Justin Kurzel, and Connor Castles made called Paradise Lost. I believe that is maybe on the Neighbours of Fish Farming website or YouTube. You can buy and read Toxic, which was meant to be a small article written by Richard Flanagan, one of Australia's most lauded authors. But what he discovered was too big to put into an article. So it's a book that you can buy or listen to. You can not buy farmed Tasmanian salmon. You can refuse to buy it. You can tell your friends not to buy it. You can ask your supermarkets not to stock it. You can ask your restaurants not to serve it. You can ask your sushi bars or tell them that what they're actually feeding you is toxic. And tell all your friends, share all of this information and vote for the environment. It's really not belonging. This is our earth, shouldn't belong to big industries anymore.
Thanks, Alistair, and thank you everyone for being here tonight for our Vote Environment rally. We at the Bob Brown Foundation really try and campaign on so many different issues to follow in through the legacy of Bob and Christine Milne, who's on our board, who are true leaders for environmental protection in Australia. But the environment is extremely in trouble, as we heard from our first speaker, Professor Terry Hughes, who is facing it every single day up there on the Great Barrier Reef. In Tarkine, Australia's largest temperate rainforests, we're facing the biggest threats ever that we've seen in the Tarkine. And that's a big call for me because I'm new to the Tarkine campaign and people have been campaigning for it for 30 years. But because we are in this climate and biodiversity crisis, which is so important to understand that they're inextricably linked, to have new mines proposed for Tarkine is a huge new threat. So in the incredible southeast part of Takina, where there's myrtles 500 years old, we have a Chinese state-owned government company called MMG, who are proposing a massive new tailings dam. Their tailings dam would pump sludge across the Pieman River into the Tarkine and cover 140 hectares, which will just be completely demolished. Now we're talking about rainforests that we can't even imagine when we're walking through it how old it is. It's so, so old. And it was the tree sitters last winter that we had in the forests who were hearing the unusual screeches of the masked owl. And these Tasmanian masked owls are cryptic. They're sort of owls that you don't see often. They're actually very under-researched. And these Tasmanian masked owls were breeding in these forests. It's taken our science team months now to be doing all the research that they have been doing to find that these owls are in those forests. And so we've been taking on the Minister for Environment, Federal Environment Minister, Minister Ley. She approved the proposal for 14 kilometres of roads and drilling for this tailings dam. Even when the company themselves were saying, hey, how about we do some work around preventing impact on the masked owl? She said, no, don't worry about it. Just get in there and get crashing into that forest. The true nature of it is that we are defiant, we are focused on direct action, and not only do we take direct action, we take legal action. So we are taking the Federal Environment Minister to the federal court, and we are out there every single day on the ground in those forests trying to defend them. Now, just 20 kilometres west of this threat in the Tarkine is a proposal for 2 new mines by another company called Venture Minerals. Now, these 2 new mines are for tin. And what we have to understand is what's coming in front of us is this greenwashing at its worst, this idea that environmentalists have to accept some mining and absolutely a new mining boom for us all to be able to save the planet. In Bob's words, that is bunk. We absolutely don't have to give up intact ancient rainforest that is habitat for rare and endangered species for the future of this planet. It's the mining boom that has got us here to where we are in this climate and extinction crisis, and it's absolutely, we need to move away from such extractive industries to what we want to see is the protection of intact landscapes. Now imagine here in Tasmania, that small little island at the bottom of Australia, which I believe a lot of you may have grown up in Australia forgetting it off the bottom of the island when you were drawing Australia in your primary school. It's not worth forgetting because it's incredible, and it has these ancient rainforests, Australia's largest temperate rainforest in Tarkine, that are threatened now more than ever. I also am here to talk to you about Australia's native forests. So I must acknowledge in our audience today is our New South Wales Koala campaigner, Doro Babek, who's been able to give me some words about the koalas, and remembering that we here are on the cusp of the federal election where the koala has been listed as endangered in 2 states in this term of government. They have suffered enormously from the bushfires in the north of New South Wales and the south of New South Wales, bushfires that we've never seen before in our entire lives. Let's remember, we're talking about the koala, the iconic species, that there has been no action taken to look after that species. There is still logging of its habitat, and there is still a vast area of forest that are not protected to save the koala. So, I could be talking to you about the fastest parrot on earth, the swift parrot that not many people know about, which is critically endangered and has been sent to its critical endangerment due to logging of Australia's forests. I could be talking to you about that amazing greater glider in Victoria that looks so cute, much like an Ewok out of, our childhood movies, still is suffering from the loss of its forests. But I'm not. I'm talking about the koala because I cannot even imagine a society that we live in where we have to stand up for the protection of the koala's forests. We know that it was suffered so much in the last term of this government. We are very worried that with a new government, which we absolutely have to vote in this Saturday, there has to be a new government. We cannot survive, the planet cannot survive any more of Scott Morrison, Josh Frydenberg, all those people who have been pushing for new coal mines, ongoing logging, and the destruction of koala habitat. But we have a lot of work to do with this new government. If it is an ALP government with Anthony Albanese at the head, we absolutely have so much work to do as environmentalists to know that this is still an ALP that backs in native forest logging. It's still an ALP that says that it won't actually do anything other than a lobby that the reef is not listed as endangered by the UN. It's still a government that backs in new coal and gas. And we absolutely have to know vote for the environment on Saturday. If you've already voted, please do remember that you've got to take action. We have to take action for the earth because we are in the final hours. We are so close to midnight where there's going to be an enormous tipping point for all of us as generations of people that have been told over and over again by scientists. It was just today I was reading in The Guardian that Professor Terry Hughes in 1996 was giving warnings. Here we are in 2022 with the power in a democracy to vote for the environment. Post-voting, taking action. And so, yes, please get involved with the Bob Brown Foundation and take action with us. And thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks, Alistair. It's, there's nothing else to vote for, is there? Well, there are a lot of other things to take into consideration, but overall, we're totally dependent on this planet. And I like to say that if the Earth was a rental property, we wouldn't get our bond back. We're making such a mess of it. It is disgusting, to use one of Essie's words, and to see the Browse Basin raising its head again with Scarborough over there. That is a massive assault on the whole of the planet, and we do need to be supporting that campaign to stop Woodside, which is, in terms of climate, one of the great villains of the planet, but a very, very prodigious lobbyist of Labor and Liberal and National Party politicians in Australia. In fact, it's had not a few of ex-politicians also get remuneration from it further down the line. And Belinda, talking about the oceans, I fell off a longboard way back in the 1950s, I think, at North Beach up in northern New South Wales, and I haven't been on one since, but I might after hearing about that. But good on the surfers, and the surfers were out at Bass Strait at Burnie last Saturday in the rain, and that was just fabulous. Thank you, Jenny, for talking about the Tarkine. In fact, you've got me going so much, the whole lot of you, that I think here's two things to end with. One, besides voting for the environment, and we know who's going to be best on the environment in each seat, but if you have any trouble, give me a call, I'll tell you. That besides voting for it, though, we've got 3 or 4 days left, and these are crucial. If you can, call your local out front environmental candidate and see if you can help her or him with how to vote on Saturday. You know, they're no match for the Clive Palmers of the world who can pay lots and lots of people to be out there. So don't be shy about that. Call them up. See if you can get a poster put in your yard. Make a donation even at this late stage if you can. And then think about after the election, making sure you ring up your new member of parliament and tell her or him what you've heard tonight and what you want them to be doing, and that you'd like to come and see them and talk about the gas, the coal, the koalas, the oceans, industrial fish farming, the Tarkine, the forests, this legion of environmental issues that we Australians face, and not least that Indigenous First Australians face as their lands get further marauded by these big corporations. We are in a representative democracy. Never be shy to pick up the phone and ask to see your new representative. She or he can only turn you down. And if they do that, then write them in longhand. Get a nice card and write in longhand and say, I want to come and see you. Please write back and let me know when the best can. If you email, they'll send you a bounce off. If you write to them and say, I'm in your electorate and I want to come and see you, that is very much more difficult for them to handle. And finally, this, I'm going, Jenny's convinced me, I'm going to go to the Tarkine after this election, where MMG is going to dump its acidic waste in a rainforest and kill it. Nothing will be left alive. And Susan Lee said, yes, go ahead and knock down the trees, which may be having nesting owls in them. She's had pause to think about that, and just Friday said, oh, she might reconsider that. Well, she knows that by the time she's done that, somebody else will be very likely the new Environment Minister, and we'll need to get on to them. But we'll go and see that company, and then we'll go into the forest and make a stand for the forest. I'll make that commitment here tonight, and that'll be next week after this election. All of us can do much more than we've been doing in the past. The planet deserves it. And I can tell you, it's just such a great feeling being on the side of the environment and people who stand up for it. So have a great next few days. Enjoy Saturday night. Wake up feeling happy on Sunday, because we really help tip the scales for our beautiful little planet and all its wildlife and our fellow human beings. Thanks, everyone.